This is a CNN special report. America under attack. In New York, Aaron Brown and Paula Zahn.
Good evening again, everyone. We're now 37 hours or so since this atrocity was committed. 30-some blocks from where we are. You can hear the sirens still in the background. This rescue mission, which has proceeded very, very slowly, has gotten much more complicated tonight. It's gotten more complicated because another building is in danger of coming down. One Liberty Plaza, about a 60-story building. We were down in the area, and you could actually see pieces of the building, glass from the windows facing to the building coming off. They moved everybody out, and they cannot move people back in to start the search for survivors, and they still believe there may be some in there until they figure out a way to stabilize that building, and that's not an easy thing to do. In the hour ahead, we have, we'll update you on the situation at Ground Zero. We have a fair amount to tell you about that. We want at some point here to offer up a sense of the human dramas that have taken place. There are some horrible, truly horrible stories and some rich stories of heroism that we want to tell you about as well. But most importantly, and certainly at the beginning, there are a number of important and in some cases dramatic breaking news developments, and that's where we want to begin. Paula.
Yeah, at the top of the show, we're going to get into the news about federal agents actually taking into custody a number of men in Providence, Rhode Island, a couple of cities in South Florida, and in Boston. We're going to get to that a little bit later on, but I think, Aaron, you would agree, one of the greatest mysteries now of this whole tragedy is how it is that 4 planes were hijacked in a relatively short period of time. And right now, we're going to go to Kelly Arena, who is going to provide us with some of the first insights we actually have as to what exactly went on Flight 93. That was the flight headed from Dulles Airport to San Francisco. Kelly, what can you tell us tonight?
Paula, as CNN has reported throughout the day, a microphone was keyed open on the hijacked flight that crashed in Pennsylvania. Now, CNN has obtained a partial transcript of what was heard by air traffic control from the cockpit. That's United Airlines Flight 93. It actually departed Newark for San Francisco. It was flying at 35,000 feet over the Cleveland area. Now, at this point, air traffic controllers heard shouting in the cockpit with someone yelling, "Get out of here." The microphone is momentarily turned off. It comes back on, some scuffling is heard, and again a voice yells, "Get out of here." The microphone is again turned off. When it is turned on again, it's clear that the pilot is no longer in the cockpit. Someone is heard speaking in broken English in what was described as an Arabic accent, telling passengers, quote, "There's a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting with their demands. We are returning to the airport." Now, to supplement that transcript, we do have some information on what was going on outside the cockpit. Family members of one passenger who phoned his family on his cell phone said the passengers, after learning that the World Trade Center had been hit, had voted to attack the terrorists. Nothing else, unfortunately, was heard from the passengers after that. That flight did hold 38 passengers and a crew of 8. Paula, Aaron?
It is so chilling to hear these accounts, Kelly. We have now, too, heard these dramatic stories of passengers on several of these flights making contact with family members, telling family members they love them. Barbara Olson, who is a contributor here at CNN, actually telling her husband exactly what was going on, and at one point sort of indicating that she needed some advice on how she could interact with the captain of the plane to prevent this horrible tragedy that it all seems with certain she sort of had a whiff of was about to happen.
Kelly, before you get away, just give me a little bit of what's going on and how we're getting this stuff. Do you expect that you're going to get full transcripts? Do you expect you're going to see, for example, what went on in the other planes in the hours, perhaps, or at least the day ahead?
Well, Aaron, this was the only plane that we are aware of that actually had its microphone turned on at any point. Of course, if the black boxes are ever recovered, we may get more information. That is going to be very difficult we're told by aviation experts at the sites concerning the World Trade Center and also here at the Pentagon, about the only black box that might be gettable at this point is the flight that did indeed crash in Pennsylvania, because they have access to that plane and to the wreckage more easily than they have access to the others. But this was not something that was officially given to us. We obtained this through sources. So for now, everything is mum as the investigation continues.
We won't ask any more about it. We don't want any sources to get burned here. Thank you for your work. That is quite remarkable stuff. Late this afternoon, we also were we better understood the president's movements yesterday. You recall, it took the president a long time, essentially all day, to get from Sarasota, Florida, where he started his day yesterday to make a speech on education, back to the White House. And I think a lot of us wondered why it took so long, what was going on. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, can join us now and provide the answers to that. John, good evening again.
Aaron, more information on the president's return to Washington tonight. Also a major development that gives us some indication of where this story might be headed in the days ahead. CNN has learned that over the past several hours, senior administration officials in negotiations with key members of Congress on what they are calling a resolution of resolve. Translation, a resolution authorizing the president to use force to retaliate for these terrorist attacks on the United States. Negotiations went on for several hours today, including the White House faxing proposed language to key members of Congress. We are told those negotiations will resume in the morning. All this as we saw the president today taking stock of some of the devastation caused by these catastrophic attacks and leading intensifying discussions debating just how the United States should respond.
A first-hand look at the devastation at the Pentagon and a patriotic moment even as the building continued to smolder.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share.
This tour as the White House responded to questions about why it took so long for the president to return to Washington after the attacks. The administration said it had reliable information that the jet that barreled into the Pentagon was initially heading toward the White House. That triggered this evacuation. And sources tell CNN the vice president and other top officials were ushered from their offices to a fortified command and control center deep under the White House grounds. The administration said Air Force One also was a target, and that is why Mr. Bush stopped at 2 military bases on a 9-hour trip back to Washington from Florida, and had fighter jet escorts on the final leg home, even after the government was certain all commercial jetliners were accounted for and on the ground.
The information that we had was real and credible about Air Force One, and the manner in which Air Force One operated maintained the security of Air Force One at all times.
Mr. Bush met twice with his national security team, and sources tell CNN the discussions included an update on the fast-developing investigation and talk of possible U.S. military responses. Mr. Bush called the attacks acts of war, and in the words of one senior official familiar with the evidence, quote, everything points to the terrorist network of Osama bin Laden.
This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover.
Now, as the administration negotiates with Congress over that resolution authorizing force, also a major diplomatic push by the White House as it tries to build what it is calling a broad international coalition to fight terrorism. The president spoke personally today with the leaders of Great Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Russia, and China. The Secretary of State involved in these efforts as well. More calls from the president expected tomorrow, and the White House welcoming gladly a resolution from NATO equating these attacks on the United States to an attack on the NATO alliance. Again, the administration negotiating with Congress on 2 fronts now, Aaron. One, a resolution authorizing the use of force. Another, they're hoping to get a bill to the president's desk as early as tomorrow afternoon, authorizing $20 billion to pay for the early recovery and investigative efforts. Aaron?
John, here's my opportunity to be naive for the moment. What's this negotiation over? I saw, as you did, all of the members of Congress standing shoulder to shoulder, as they said 3 or 4 times. What is the negotiation here?
Well, certainly the negotiation is over the specific language. We heard some guests earlier on Larry King Live when we first reported this saying they didn't foresee there being a problem. Some questions in Congress about giving the president a blank check. Remember, they have yet to announce any conclusions of the investigation, yet to say officially who they believe or which parties they believe are responsible for this. So in the Congress right now, they don't want this to become a Tonkin Gulf resolution. They don't want some open-ended resolution, but we are told progress being made in negotiations on a resolution that would say if the administration has credible evidence as to who is responding, then the Congress would support using force to retaliate.
And John, just quickly, in the normal course of events, in a normal day when the president travels, are there military escorts flying with the president?
There are often military escorts in the air. Very rare that we, the reporters traveling on Air Force One or with the president on another aircraft, would see them. They do go up as routine security at a distance just to be safe, especially on international trips. To see a fighter jet just off the wing of Air Force One, quite extraordinary. That a sign of the intense security triggered by this event, and there are other security precautions being taken as well. CNN, in fact, has been told the vice president not staying in his official residence here in Washington. He is staying in a more secure location for now.
And weren't we told yesterday that the Secret Service said or believed that Air Force One was not at risk?
Yes, we were told that. Secret Service saying throughout the day that they did not believe Air Force One was at risk. Now officials saying that they do believe that it may have been a potential target, but they note that that's why it did not come back to Washington. They would say now that it was not at risk because it did not return to airspace anywhere near Washington, anywhere near the northern half of the country for that matter, until they had accounted for all commercial airliners. At the time the president left Florida for Louisiana, when he left Florida originally, that plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh was still in the air. U.S. officials now saying once they knew all the planes were down, all the other planes were accounted for, so they waited for some planes to land that the FAA had instructed to land. Only then, when the skies were clear, did the president return to Washington.
John, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, at the White House on his post tonight. John, thanks. Paul?
As you know, Aaron, because you've been on the air most of the day, as I have, we don't even know what day it is anymore. One of the challenges of covering this story is the information comes at us and in small pieces, and we're just beginning to be able to put some of this stuff together. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, confirming that the suspected hijackers actually were, some of them, trained in the United States as pilots. He also confirmed that the planes, individual planes that were hijacked by as many as 3 to 6 individuals on each plane, some of them using knives and box cutters, and as Kelly Arena just reported, in the case of this flight going from Newark to San Francisco, bomb threats. Federal agents have taken some folks into custody in Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, Vero Beach, and Venice, Florida, and right now we're going to go to a report by Mike Betcher that helps us all better understand how broad this investigation is underway tonight.
From Maine to Florida, the investigation moved quickly along the eastern seaboard.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Federal investigators now believe they know the identity of 4 men capable of piloting the 2 planes that left Boston and crashed into the World Trade Center. The key, rental cars parked by the suspected terrorist at Portland International Airport and Boston's Logan Airport, each yielding clues that ultimately led investigators to flight schools in Florida.
A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
Rental records for the car left in Portland brought investigators to residences in Vero Beach, Florida, which were searched by the FBI. Inside one house, pictures of Adnan Bukhari and a pilot certificate from a Florida flight school in his name. Also found inside the residence, another pilot certificate for Amir Abbas Bukhari. Another certificate indicates that at least one of the Bukharis participated in a program to help train Saudi Airlines employees. Federal investigators believe the 2 men are brothers and prime suspects. FBI agents also visited other Florida locations after gathering clues from the second rental car parked at Boston's Logan Airport that led to the identity of 2 more men, also pilots. Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef Al-Shehi, who received at least some flight training at Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida. Charles Voss is a bookkeeper at Huffman Aviation who briefly allowed the two men to stay at his house.
They were, like I said, students, and they arrived over there a year ago. It was in last July. And when they first arrived, they had no place to stay. They just popped in pretty much, as I recall, unannounced. And so we provided them, for the benefit of the flight school, provided them a place to stay for a few days.
At least one person believed to be an acquaintance of the Bukharis has been taken into custody for questioning.
There have been occasions where we have interviewed individuals and come to find that the individual is out of status and that individual has been detained on an immigration hold. But there have been no arrests relating to these hijackings at this point.
Having found the four men, federal investigators believe piloted the two hijacked jets into the World Trade Center towers. They are now scouring Florida flight schools, searching for the pilots of the other two jetliners, one that crashed in Pennsylvania, the other that rammed the Pentagon.
Now, about the nationality of those four suspects, the Bukhari brothers are Saudis, according to sources, and the other two suspects are holders of United Arab Emirate passports. Now, we have several new pieces of information provided by CNN correspondent Eileen O'Connor, who has been providing new information all day long. She says 3 people were taken into custody in an FBI raid at the Westin Copley Hotel in Boston. They are material witnesses. They were not arrested. They are material witnesses. They have also learned, according to her sources, federal investigators, they've also learned that 7 of the airline tickets were purchased with 1 credit card. That is a critical piece of information, according to those investigators. As well, we've learned that, and Eileen O'Connor has learned, that America Online, which is the parent company of CNN, has handed over records on email accounts that were used by suspects in this case. And as well, Eileen O'Connor is reporting that 2 hijackers used a ferry to get to the United States to Bar Harbor, Maine from Nova Scotia. So they used a ferry to reach this country. Paula?
Mike, if you could clear up something for us tonight. I know some of the officials I've talked to are quite sensitive about calling these men who have been taken into custody as suspects. Can we, with great comfort, call all these men that are being questioned suspects tonight, or just a couple of them? What is their status?
Well, Paula, those who are living, who were taken, the people at the hotel who were taken, are material witnesses. We're not calling them suspects. The federal investigators aren't calling them suspects. But the 4 people who the federal investigators say are suspects, the Bukhari brothers and the other 2 people down in Florida, they believe those 4 people are dead, Paula, and they were on the airplane and are very likely the 4 people who would have flown the aircraft, the 2 airplanes, into the 2 World Trade Center towers.
Mike, earlier today you spent some time focusing in on reports that both surfaced in the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald showing the vulnerabilities of Logan Airport. Those reporters calling the security procedures there in some cases shoddy. Based on what you're learning about what has been retrieved from that car that was parked at Logan Airport, could anything have stopped these guys? Any security procedures have stopped these guys from carrying off what they accomplished out of Logan Airport?
Well, you know, Paula, let me answer it this way. I spent 5 weeks in Beirut this summer. A lot of it doing stories on suicide bombers for later reporting that I'm doing. And a suicide bomber, there's very little chance of stopping a suicide bomber. They believe they're going to glory. That's why they leave behind clues. They want people to know who they are because, Paula, they believe they aren't coming back and they're going on to a better life. That is their belief.
Walk us through very briefly what you think we can expect tomorrow in terms of even more developments on this front.
Well, the FBI is checking flight schools in Florida and other parts of the country. They believe they'll find the pilots of the other 2 aircraft, the one that crashed in Pennsylvania and the one that crashed
into the Pentagon. They're desperately trying to find those other pilots, but I got to tell you, they've moved very quickly today, have done an excellent job. They've already, in this day after, have what they believe are 4 of the pilots involved in this.
All right, Mike Boettcher, thanks for your complete reporting. Aaron and I are about to be drowned out by sirens. I don't think we have any idea.
Yeah, I have some idea.
What is going on now?
I have some idea. You can hear the sirens. I'm going to turn my back on you for a second. We've been seeing police and fire moving up the street here, and we are told now that the Empire State Building, one of the absolute symbols of the city of New York, is being evacuated. There's a lot we don't know, okay? We do not know what is precipitating this. We don't know if there was a call, if there's obviously some belief that there's a threat to the building, but we don't know where that came from, where it was directed to, why now, what is happening. What we do know, and the most important thing to tell you right now, is that the Empire State Building, one of the symbols of this city of New York, perhaps in many ways other than the Statue of Liberty, the best known symbol. You can see the building. It's not very far from where we are. I mean, I'm literally looking at it as you are from our camera location. It is being evacuated.
Now, Aaron, what I'm noticing is, if you were to contrast this with last night, no lights are on in the building.
Well, and I may be wrong about this, but it seemed to me, you guys have been looking at this as well, that a couple of minutes ago when I first heard this, there was more light in that building than there is now. And I have no idea if there is any significance to that. But the building is being evacuated, and there are office workers in the building. We assume maintenance people working through the building, as in most of these office buildings at night. People who came to work today in the city, and believe me, there wasn't a lot of work getting done here today. We suspect have gone home long ago. We don't know how many people are in the Empire State Building, but all of them are being told to get out. And you heard, as we were talking just a moment ago, the sound of the sirens coming up when are essentially empty streets here. It's not like they need the sirens to clear people out of the way, but they were, and there were a fair number of them coming up the street, and we assume that that is related to whatever is going on in the Empire State Building. We assume that in part because the World Trade Center itself, ground zero in all of this, is still 30 blocks or so, give or take, from the Empire State Building from where we are tonight.
Now, what some folks who don't live in New York might not know is that the top of the Empire State Building is usually lighted to indicate what the weather pattern is in the city. Last night, the lights were out to indicate the tremendous loss that was suffered here.
Now, down at ground zero, the rescue operation, I want to turn the other way for a second. I want to turn the other way. I believe you can see it, and I'll step out of the way if that helps, but it almost looks like it's been lighted. You can see the smoke coming up, and there does seem to be some light in back of it. I'm gonna guess here, and it is only a guess, that what you've got is power generators and night lights working to allow the rescue crews that are in the area to work at night. Part of the reason I believe this is as I was making my way down towards the building this afternoon, there were lines, there were dozens of generators and night lights that were waiting on the West Side Highway, a major thoroughfare in New York, waiting to get into the area so that the relief and the rescue crews could work through the night. There were dozens of those generators. There were also dozens of construction vehicles as well, and we now presume that they are getting that kind of lighting so that they can continue this very slow operation. Also, we will tell you within, well, literally across the street from where we are.
Aaron, there's another thing I need to add. While you were talking, I have just learned that Penn Station is currently being evacuated. Once again, we have very limited information on this.
And Penn Station is literally across the street from where we're standing. I mean, it is, you walk across the street from this building at 5 Penn Plaza in New York, and you are in Penn Station. Now, why this is happening, where these threats, why officials believe these buildings are at risk, we do not know. Penn Station takes commuters. The Amtrak comes out of Penn Station. It is a very busy place in New York. It is directly connected to Madison Square Garden, as they say, the world's most famous arena, and another one of those symbols of New York. And so now, two enormously well-known buildings, the Empire State Building, Penn Station adjacent to Madison Square Garden, and adjacent to where we are being evacuated, and we don't know if it's a hoax or it's serious or what it is. We just know what's happening.
And as these threats are being investigated, we should also point out that as we stand here on this platform, there is great concern about the structural status of a 54-story tower that sits across from what is left of that World Trade Center complex. The west side of the building is seriously degraded. This has meant that rescuers had to be evacuated from some of the perimeter areas surrounding the World Trade Center because of the imminent danger. We should say about the only ray of hope coming out of New York City earlier today was the fact that rescue workers were able to successfully rescue some 11 people. 6 of them firefighters, 3 police officers, 2 civilians, one of whom actually made a cell phone call to a family member saying he was trapped inside the rubble. Unfortunately, we are dealing now with the reality that firefighters are telling us about, that 90% of the folks you rescue are usually rescued within the first 24 hours of a catastrophe. That does not mean that rescuers are giving up hope, but that is the cold, stark reality this evening.
We are obviously doing very aggressive reporting now, trying to figure out why it is that officials have ordered the evacuation of these 2 buildings, Penn Station and the Empire State Building. We'll just keep coming back to this until we figure out what's happening down there and what either local police or federal officials believe is the threat. Down at the Trade Center itself, reporters have been making their way through the area. I'm going to take a chance that Brian Nelson can hear me now. Can he? Brian, are you down there?
I can hear you, Aaron. Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you.
Brian,
help me. About 5 to 7 blocks.
Can you
hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine, and we see you as well. You're on the video phone. Our viewers, I think, are familiar with that. Again, tell us where you are, and then tell us what you can see.
Well, we're about 5 to 7 blocks away from the ruins of the World Trade Center, and this is really ground zero, as you call it. And all day long since this afternoon into this evening, there have been a parade of trucks coming in and out of here. On the way in, those trucks are carrying heavy machinery, front loaders, back haulers, and some very big haulers. They go in empty, and they return maybe a couple of hours later, and those haulers are carrying pieces of twisted debris, girders that have just been wrecked beyond description. There are pieces of concrete, and there are cars that have been caught and demolished in the wreckage that are sitting on top of that pile. They are all being carried out of here one piece at a time. And we also see, and this is the grim part of this story, Aaron, refrigerated trucks also going out, and we presume that they are carrying human remains. The rescue workers, though, have been picking over the debris at the World Trade Center with dogs, and doing it so very gingerly. They're using the dogs particularly because they have a scent, of course, and they are afraid to disturb the remains there. And so they are not using a lot of the heavy equipment they have. They are using pieces. They're picking it out one piece at a time so as not to force any collapse that would jeopardize anyone still alive beneath. This is ground central, as I mentioned earlier. It's also ground central for fear, apprehension. Behind me, and Paula mentioned this earlier, is the Liberty Plaza building. I don't think you can see it in the darkness, but that building is believed to have been structurally weakened in the collapse of the World Trade Center, and so there is some danger that it might collapse itself. And so the press have been pushed back at least a block or two from where they were earlier just because of that danger. There was also rumors of a gas leak today that sent hundreds of people stampeding down the streets away from the scene of the World Trade Center, and that includes all the rescue workers. They're very much afraid that something might explode, and that turned out to be not the case. And we had a woman down here, a very emotional woman down here where the press is corralled. She was carrying posters and pictures of people who I might presume she worked with. And she was just very emotional because they had not been It hasn't been seen for days.
Brian, terrific work, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I'm going to do it anyway, and we'll talk about it later. We've got something that's unfolding now.
There is a news conference going underway in Los Angeles. The brother of one of the pilots of the plane that slammed into the Pentagon is now talking to the press.
In Arlington National Cemetery, Chick was actively involved in the Leadership Endowment Project for the United States Naval Academy Foundation. He was an exemplary human being. He was a hero long before this happened, and he was a hero to our entire family. We'll take a few questions.
Being a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, I mean, it shows just that alone. He was an extraordinary individual. Was he also extraordinarily patriotic? And what would he have thought about the action taken against all these civilians? Any idea?
I can tell you that my brother was a very patriotic American. His biography is a testament to that. His chief concern when this was going on, I can assure all of the passengers on his airplane and his, or the loved ones of those passengers and his crew members, his chief concern would have been their safety. He had impeccable judgment. That judgment was carefully honed as a naval officer flying on landing jets on carrier decks in the middle of the night. He was a very brave man. What would he have thought of, from a political point of view? I assure you that wouldn't have been going on in his mind. He would have been he was a very disciplined man who would have been working at the task at hand. And those people need to know that their captain was very, very brave. He was the quintessential example of courage under fire.
Brad, you spoke a little bit ago about your brother as being a hero. We're hearing bits and pieces now about what may have happened on board these flights. When you hear the narrative from the federal officials about what perhaps went down with the box cutters and overtaking the cockpits and the like, what are your thoughts? How do you think your brother may have held up in that circumstance?
I'm reluctant to speculate on what he would have done or what happened on board that flight. That's for the federal authorities to review and discover, although I know Chick would have done absolutely the right thing in the best interest for his fellow crew members and for every single passenger on that plane.
Had he ever spoken about the possibility of being hijacked?
Chick was always reassuring people that airplanes are one of the safest places you can be. I'm sure that he was aware that when he went to work that there was always a possibility of some kind of catastrophe. But for him, it was very, very remote. I don't think that when Chick went to work, he thought about hijacking. But that doesn't mean that he didn't conduct himself in the most impeccable fashion.
At one point, you were looking at the split screen image of the damage caused by the plane hitting the Pentagon. Excuse me. And one of the points we need to make now is that White House spokesman Ari Fleischer confirmed earlier today that, in fact, the intended target of that plane was not the Pentagon, but perhaps the White House. And he also acknowledged that Air Force One was considered a target of this attack. Instead, this plane went down into the Pentagon. There are chilling accounts of how the plane made a 250-degree turn as it came into a very low angle over the land surrounding the Pentagon. Aaron?
Well, we have told you the Empire State Building is being evacuated. Penn Station is being evacuated. More lives are being disrupted tonight as they were yesterday. It seems in some moments, to be honest, that there isn't a New Yorker who hasn't had their lives disrupted by this tragedy, this atrocity that has taken place in this city. Every time we hear sirens, I'll confess, we're not so cold about this that we don't jump a little bit. You hear them and it gets a little scary. And it is that kind of feeling, that fear and that anger that we have found consistently on the streets of our city. More on that, here's CNN's Beth Nissen.
This is what New Yorkers woke up to this morning. those who'd managed to sleep at all during a night of surreal quiet. No planes overhead, no car alarms, strangely no sirens. This morning, no traffic jams, no rush hour crowds, no 110-story buildings where 2 had stood yesterday. People rushed to buy up postcards, vibrant reminders of what New York City looked like on Monday.
I'm used to seeing the Twin Towers, and this morning they weren't there. It was sad. It was just, it's just horrible.
Yesterday it was all so unreal, so distant. By today, it had hit home. So many people knew the name of someone who never called home yesterday, never came back from work. A neighbor, a friend, a brother-in-law.
This is what he looks like, and if anyone's seen anything, we'd appreciate them calling to try to help us out. The phone number is 718-432-5982, and anything that anyone can do to try to help us find him.
People who hadn't read a newspaper in months hunted down copies today, read every word, gasped at still photos that stopped the heart. It had happened. It had really happened. Slowly today, the state of stun, the disbelief, gave way. In some cases to anger. In this city of fast moves and blunt words, there were many who wanted vengeance in a New York minute.
I've always been a bleeding heart liberal, but right now I certainly feel a lot of anger, and, I mean, there's a side of me that wants to see our government just go and whoever's an enemy, just hit him now and ask questions later.
But as most people began to comprehend what had happened at the World Trade Center, what had to have happened to all those people, disbelief gave way to sorrow, to great aching sadness. So many people in this city of walkers walked with their heads low today, depressed, defeated somehow. The bad guys seem to have won this time. Americans don't have much experience with defeat. New Yorkers don't ever admit it. Hundreds lined up on the West Side Highway, the main access to the attack site, to offer their support, to rally their spirits. But on the day after, just one long day, millions of New Yorkers are already so weary. New Yorkers don't wait well, and they've had to wait for the phone calls saying, "I'm fine, she's okay," or "We haven't heard from him yet." They've had to wait for hard facts. How many saved? How many lost? Who did this? And why? And today they began to realize the waiting may last weeks, months, even years. The waiting for answers, for comfort, for peace of mind, for justice. For the first day they wake up and don't immediately think of this. Beth Nissen, CNN, New York.
And right now, it is time to check in with Tricia Stevens. You were one of the very lucky ones. You were working in 2 World Trade Center.
Yes.
Explain to us where you were when these attacks happened.
We were on the 98th floor of 2 World Trade Center. It was about a few minutes to 9. We were at our desks, and the person who sits behind me, thank God, Sandra, was the first to see the flames that were coming from the impact from 1 World Trade Center. And she screamed, "It's a bomb, let's get out of here." And that just sent us all running. We ran to the staircase. We ran down 20 flights of stairs from 98 to 78. And I was so lucky I got on the first elevator down. And it's the express elevator down to floor 1. When we got to floor 1, we had people telling us to just get out of there, get out of there. And as soon as we got to the door leading to the outside, we heard this noise. I call it the sound of destruction, because that's all you could really think that it was. And you just heard this massive sound. What I later learned was the plane crashing into the building, and debris falling, and people screaming. And
how did you stay alive?
when I came out, I lost the hand of the person I was with, Vivian, and I went running around, and I saw a van that was carrying flowers to the farmer's market, and I jumped in, and I waited there. I don't know how long it was. I was screaming and hysterical, but I realized that if anything happened, I was so close to the building that I had to get away. I jumped out and I ran across the street. There was a police officer there who grabbed my hand and helped me up to where the Brooks Brothers building was. And after that, I just kept running and walking and running.
And that was your instinct to run, 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 and you found yourself actually on the Brooklyn Bridge then, many minutes later.
I ran into my co-worker, Helena, and together we just walked and walked and walked to the Brooklyn Bridge. When we got to the other side, on the Brooklyn side, we both turned around and we saw our building that I was in shortly before just crumbled right before our eyes, and we couldn't believe it because we have two people from my job, Helene, Frank Neistat, and Barbara Gazzardo. They haven't found them yet. And he works in our department.
And I think that's one of the most devastating parts of this tragedy, because so few people know where the thousands of folks are that were working in those towers. You actually emailed friends today to describe to them what went on. Did you do that for catharsis?
There were so many people calling me, and people in tears thinking that I was dead because they saw the building collapse. And it hurt me so much to hear them crying because they thought I wasn't there anymore. And it was the phones weren't working well, so it was the fastest way to let a lot of people know that I was okay and to let them know what happened. And that people got out. You know, some of us got out. And there's hope, you know.
One of the things you expressed in this email is your gratitude for that police officer as you were hiding behind that van that somehow had the instinct to tell you, you gotta get out of here, you gotta get out from under this van. Will you ever forget his face?
No. No, I won't forget his face. He ran towards me when I was running towards him, and there were so many people looking and watching, and he just like grabbed me, and you know, he gave me focus to get, you know, away, because otherwise there's so much going on around you, you're not really sure where to go, you know.
You have to feel so lucky as we're standing here tonight.
I'm blessed, and I'm guided by the hand of God, and for so many of us that got down the stairs in time to get on that elevator, I truly believe that God has just taken us out of that building, because there's so many who did not make it, and we're truly blessed.
Before we let you go, any thoughts on the heroism that the hundreds of firefighters on duty exhibited, and the police officers, one of whom you said forever will have an impact on your life?
It's really sad, because while we were running away, they were running towards us. And nobody could have known that that was going to happen, that the building was going to collapse. And we pray for them, and we're so appreciative, because without them, we would not have known to just get out as quickly as we did. And I remember police officers saying, head north, get away, when people were standing, and they were just telling us to get away as quickly as possible. And they saved a lot of lives, and we're appreciative.
Well, you certainly represent the triumph of the spirit here in New York. We know this is extremely painful for you to share your story here this evening. We appreciate your coming by, Tricia, and best of luck. Aaron, as you and I both listened to Tricia, I guess the one thing that came to mind today is the amount of gratefulness that New Yorkers have expressed to the firefighters and the rescue workers on duty. At one point tonight, I am told that a couple hundred New Yorkers actually worked their way in within 2 blocks of Ground Zero to thank and cheer on the rescue workers on duty.
I was coming up from the scene down there at about 8 o'clock tonight, and we're coming through Tribeca. We drove by, we were behind a caravan of police and fire officials, and out from a bar or a tavern, I wasn't sure, it went by pretty quickly, a group of people had come out, because this is a street where there's been a tremendous amount of movement of rescue personnel, and they came out and they were holding little votive candles. and they just were holding them out towards the firefighters, the police officers, the assorted rescue workers from not just New York City, but all over the area, just to say thanks. They were quiet. There was no whistling, yelling, applauding. It was just this very sweet gesture, and I suspect there were lots of others. Tricia, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's really hard. Hasn't been much good news, so let me pass along a little bit. We can tell you that the all clear has been given at both the Empire State Building and at Penn Station. I guess about 20 minutes after an evacuation order was given in those two buildings, the all clear has been given, and whatever it was, it's over, it's done, it's fine. Now, a little bit farther downtown from where we are in Washington Square Park, there is, and I think we have pictures of it, there we go, a vigil going on tonight. Washington Square Park's one of the quirkier places in the city. It's a lovely and interesting area, and a fascinating assortment of people gather there every day for all sorts of different reasons.
Quirky is a generous way of describing Washington Park, Aaron.
Quirky is, I like to think of it as a thoughtful way. It doesn't require I explain much more. But there's all sorts of interesting folks down there of all ages and backgrounds, as you see in the city of New York, and they're just down there simply to pray and to stand together, to be together. Being together is one of the things that we as humans like to do in these moments. We share our misery and our sorrow and our anger together, and we pray together, and however we do that, and that's what's going on down in Washington Square Park right now. John Voss is not too terribly far away from there, a correspondent of ours down on the ground, and he can tell us a little bit more about what he has been seeing. John?
Aaron, this has indeed been a very long day for this nation, for this city, but especially for the workers who are on that site, who are on their search and rescue mission, searching for bodies and hoping and praying to rescue people who may still be alive. We spoke with them as they left. They talk of a skittish atmosphere, much like when someone in a theatre jumps up and yells fire. That's the atmosphere down there. They are on a knife's edge. They talk about finding an American flag, pausing for a moment to salute it. They talk about the orange pieces of plastic which marks the spot where they find body parts or bodies, and how when they look on that pile of debris it seems as if there is orange plastic almost every 10 feet. But perhaps the saddest story today we heard from a woman who was walking up and down West Street here. She was carrying photos of a young man. She was trying to find him. She'd called all the telephone numbers, she'd called the 1-800 numbers, the hospitals, the police. No one had seen him. No one had seen her nephew.
This is our last resort, to see if there's somebody out there who knows anything about, seeing him or knowing where he's at or seeing him, in the building or whatever, and for them to call us and let us know.
Obviously, great feelings of anxiety, which are shared by so many people in this city and in this nation tonight. Just to add what Brian was telling us about the dump trucks earlier tonight, they are moving in through here. There are hundreds of them. They were banked up. They were lined up all day today. They are going in empty, and they are coming out with debris. We are told they are taking that debris to barges where it is being handed over to the FBI, where they will sift through that debris looking for evidence. Aaron.
John, thank you. John Voss down in the ground zero area, a little 4 or 5 blocks back from it, we guess. Paula.
And Jeff Greenfold has just dropped by to share some of his thoughts on what the president is facing at this moment and what the country will have to endure in the weeks to come.
We were thinking about the president, what he was doing today, and you think back to last year's election, peace and prosperity seemed a fact of nature. We all said there are no big issues on the table. What real issues could a new president have to deal with? Now we know, and a question arises, how have past presidents dealt with crises, and how have those crises defined their presidencies? Political benefit. But when President Johnson escalated the war in Vietnam after an alleged attack on U.S. naval vessels, the resulting firestorm helped drive him into retirement.
When it comes to patriotism,
Richard Nixon had Middle America with him on the war in Vietnam. It was the Watergate scandal, of course, that sunk him.
If Iran should release the hostages.
Jimmy Carter's political defeat in 1980 was sealed by his failure to get American hostages out of Iran.
And here's an instructive irony.
Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq.
President Bush's success in the Gulf War pushed his approval ratings past 90%.
All right.
But the resulting high oil prices and shaken consumer confidence led to a brief but politically fatal recession.
Their legacy must be our lives.
President Clinton, he never looked as presidential as when he led the nation in mourning after the Oklahoma City bombing. But maybe the past doesn't really tell us all that much. I mean, presidents have led us into war, but we've known who the enemy was and what the war was about. We've had presidents console us with losses, but never a loss this enormous and this threatening. So I think what we really can say, much as we look to history for guidance, this president, 9 months into his term, is facing a challenge no other president has ever faced before.
What are your thoughts about what the president had to say today when he toured the area surrounding the Pentagon?
I think everything this president has done and said is what he has to do and say, and it is going to get enormous support from all parts of the political spectrum. The question is not what he says, but what happens in the weeks and months ahead, because this is not a patient nation. And what my point is that this country doesn't always support a president if he doesn't deliver. The piece we didn't see is that Franklin Roosevelt, when he got us into World War II after Pearl Harbor, everybody supported him, but that war was prosecuted successfully. And so the question now is, what happens when people say, you've got to do something, we've got to strike, and then people say, do we really know who to strike at? I think this is an enormous challenge, more complicated maybe than any president's ever faced.
And it strikes me that in an interview I did earlier today with Secretary of State Colin Powell, he is preparing the nation for a long assault. He said this is not going to be over in a week or two. This is going to require the combined efforts of the United States and what he called the world neighborhood or world community.
And look at what happens beyond even military action. Look at what happened just a few moments ago. The nervousness that runs through this country where anybody can make a phone call and evacuate the Empire State Building and Penn Station. What happens when the commercial airlines get back into work and somebody calls in a bomb case? How much more seriously will we take it? How much more disruption? And that's what I mean by the uniqueness of this challenge. This president is facing not simply the need to take military action, not simply an enormous loss of life, but the whole possibility of a ripple of disruption throughout this country. I can't think of a historical parallel to it.
Jeff, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Around the city of New York tonight, there are literally hundreds of people, perhaps thousands of people in hospitals. They have been taken there over mostly yesterday, early yesterday. They're being treated from injuries that are as simple as scrapes and bruises and as serious as you can imagine, as life-threatening as you can imagine. The medical correspondent today, Elizabeth Cohn, visited one of them, and here is her report.
Andrew Zucker started his day Tuesday on the 86th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. After the first explosion, the one in the North Tower, his wife called.
And he said, I'm okay, I'll call you back, and he hung up.
But then his building blew up.
If I know Andrew, he stopped to help somebody, and I don't even want to think about what happened, and I don't know what happened to him, but he's just not here.
But thinks she must, because like many people who stood in line to find out about their missing loved ones, Erica says she still thinks her husband may still be alive. So while Erica worked the phones Wednesday, her sister, Naomi Konovich, and family friend Susan Feldman went out on a search, one hospital at a time, starting at New York University Medical Center, where there were no answers.
Bellevue, I think, is on like 27th. It's only like 3 or 4 more blocks down.
After Bellevue, on to Beekman Hospital. No one had seen him there either.
Someone told us actually to go over to the medical examiner's office.
They told Naomi to gather dental records and hair samples in case they'd have to identify his body.
They don't have lists of people who were found dead. They don't have anything.
Late in the day, after buying a mask to keep out the dust circulating after all the explosions, she checked yet more public offices, Still, no one had heard of Andrew Zucker.
They said there were a couple of John Does in the hospital. We're hoping to find that maybe one of them is him.
In the end, a frustrated Naomi distributed flyers to the media.
He's about 6'1", heavy set with the big shoulders and a big chest.
While her sister kept up the round of calls to the hospitals, to the morgue.
If you do see him or you're with him, just tell him we all love him and just to hold in there. And we just want him to come home. We need him to come home.
Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, New York.
An odd or end, if you will. One of our colleagues who lives over in Brooklyn woke up this morning and looked out in his backyard, and scattered about were pieces. We're working off that camera. There we go. Here, hang on to that for me.
You want me to hold that for you?
Yeah, would you please? Thank you. Pieces of scraps of paper that had blown. You can see the edges of them. I hope you can see it at least. The edges of them singed. This comes from Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the investment firms in the World Trade Center. Obviously, when the building blew and the paper flew, it scattered all over the area. It crossed the water and in and over to Brooklyn and into our friend and colleague's backyard today. And I wonder how many people around the area woke up to something like this.
Well, for the first time, we are being told that New Yorkers as far away as 4 miles from here are smelling the stinging smoke that continues to come from what is left of the World Trade Center. I think you made it clear, Aaron, that area continues to be illuminated tonight. You'll just find that over my right shoulder where rescue workers are still on duty.
When I was down there earlier today, the smell is indescribable and it is unforgettable. I mean, I hope never again to have it. It's absolutely awful, and I wouldn't even know how to begin to tell you what it smells like. It smells like nothing I've ever experienced, but I know I'll never forget it.
Right now, we'd like to share with you some of the thoughts of Bruce Morton as he focuses in on how the nation will have to continue to come to grips with the magnitude of what has been handed us.
The House will be in order.
Congress went back to work.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
People went to church trying to make sense of it all. God made us free, the homily said, to do good or evil. And people went back to work. In New York, exhausted rescue workers caught their breath. Signs said pray, and surely many did. And some just cried. Major League Baseball canceled all its games for the second straight day. New York's tunnels were closed. Airports looked ghostly. This was Dallas-Fort Worth. The limited flights for stranded people will resume. An odd day for those who work in airports.
I've been here for almost 6 months, and I've never, ever, it's almost peaceful.
In Chicago at the Sears Tower, America's tallest building, it was business as usual. But some who work in it are worried.
And this is the tallest building I ever worked in. Normally the buildings it would go like 21 or maybe 31, but this is the tallest and I'm terrified.
Newspaper headlines offered a sample of reaction to the terror, pretty straightforward mostly. The San Francisco Examiner was just plain angry. And on talk radio, this is San Francisco's KGO, people, this man said he was an airline pilot, talked.
What more do you need? Do we need to have the Capitol taken out and the joint session of Congress before this thing can turn nuclear? I'm just so furious over it.
Back in Washington, the mall looked empty except for accidental tourists, a stranded Australian.
This is just a terrible thing, and clearly it's a threat to all of us, to our safety, and it's a threat to democracy.
A woman from Topeka wondering how to get home.
Is there a train? I don't even know. We don't have trains in Kansas.
A student.
Just to see so many police officers everywhere. Everywhere you go, National Guards out on some of the streets. It's eerie.
Lots of flags, all at half-staff. Walmart sold 88,000 this day, 6,000 on the same day last year. At the Capitol's railroad station, a sign people could sign, and did, and a street musician playing a bugle call he probably hadn't played in years. Sadness and tiredness, back to work, still grieving, but determined. Bruce Morton, CNN, Washington.
And one more image for you tonight. Tomorrow,